Hello everyone, I'm Refik. I'm a media artist currently joining you from Los Angeles, California from our studio. I'm also part of S+T+ARTS Mindspace Consortium, and I'm happy to today show you where we are, what we are doing. So please join me. So as a studio, we have been working with generally data and machine intelligence. Especially here we will be seeing some exciting research we have been doing. Here Raman and Nidhi working on our upcoming data sculptures using large-scale robotic printing in collaboration with AI Build and KUKA. And then we just finished a project in Portland, Oregon, which used this machine and 3D print large-scale AI data sculpture, specifically using the city's cultural archives, close to like 10 million images of Portland, and transform it into a three-dimensional sculpture. Here we are. Welcome to the studio. And here is Homan. He's experimenting with expanded reality project upcoming. This is our immersive room where we will be doing experiments. And here you will be seeing some AI data painting studies from the ISS data sets, from the New York, and also from Mars. So we have been exploring machine intelligence and trying to transform the machine consciousness into a pigment for almost last 4 years. And especially here, you will be mostly exploring different parts of our upcoming performances or installations. For example, this one is from Artec House, New York project. If you come here, we do also work with a lot of like temporary immersive environments. Right here, I would like to show you something else. Please welcome to Infinity Room. Oh, Kerry here. So we are here working on an upcoming project, Quantum Dreams. It's an exploration of quantum computing and the speculation about near future and what will happen in a world when the machine can imagine in quantum mechanics and what will happen to our cognitive skills as humanity and how we can reinterpret this world. So Kerry is here and Toby is recording this awesome video. So hope you enjoyed this tour. So from here we will be talking with, maybe we can go here, Toby. Today in this video, we will be talking with Kenric McDowell to discuss our past collaboration at AMI, and hope you will enjoy this unique dialogue with Kenric McDowell and me. Thank you. Hello, Ars Electronica 2020. This is one of the maybe Kepler's garden, or we are here in Los Angeles, in California with Kenric McDowell. As you witness our studio structures and everything, we have been super happy as a studio, one of the first arts in residency at Google AMI program, and Kenric as a curator, as a mentor, helped me personally and our studio to navigate in two important projects, Archive Dreaming and WSH Dreams project. And today we are together in our studio, and thanks to his time, we will be discussing our past collaborations, and thanks to his time, we will hopefully deep dive into new ways of thinking with these types of imaginations. Welcome, Kenric.
Thank you, Refik.
Friends in all around the world for Ars Electronica wanna hear things that inspired both of us. But I'm first of all extremely grateful for you to be here because we met literally maybe 4 years ago in San Francisco in the gray area for the Deep Dream, an amazing day. So I just want to go back that day just because it was really huge inspiration. That event.
It's really interesting to look back at that moment now, especially because so much of what we were speculating about has actually come to pass in terms of like the tools that people are using, the emergence of artistic practices that are really grounded in those tools, and even the structure of engagement that we were imagining and trying for the first time that year of collaborating with artists inside of a AI research group inside of a tech company. Like that was really a proposition that was being made at the event, the Deep Dream event at Gray Area. And then here we are 4 years later, and practices like yours and many other people's have sprung up around it. And so, it's not that we take credit for all of that, like with the program, Artists and Machine Intelligence, but it certainly was part of our vision that would be happening and something that we wanted to support. So it's really, 4 years is not a long time.
For our discipline.
But then again, the last 4 months have felt like an incredibly long time. Yeah. So it's hard to really understand time.
One thing that I remember in the event that, first of all, everyone was, brilliant in their ideas and vision, but I was probably maybe the only artist on the stage that honestly I didn't know too much about AI in terms of practically thinking and using it. Mm-hmm. But very openly saying this, for records or dialogues, I think that specific arts in residency not only helped me, but as a team, like I'm not alone here. I represent my colleagues, my friends in the studio, but how we learn, not only just practically thinking by code or by the available tools, but also thinking the future of what we are doing for archive dreaming specifically, mm-hmm. and opened my mind so much that I don't know, I wish I can have the similar open-mindedness and collaboration quality and context and discourse, and like that feeling is really rare to capture. Mm-hmm. At least last 4 years, and I'm again very grateful for this type of imagination together. Because also in those dialogues, what we have been talking about, which I think today can be inspiring, is synesthetic architecture. Like this idea about like, can a building dream, or can it learn? Can it hallucinate? Can it become a part of our life? And honestly, archive dreaming like truly did that in a different way, but we didn't finish there. So we keep going, which is really, I don't know what other arts residencies can do that, but I don't know how can I be more productive and more resourceful. So thank you again for this.
Of course. It's an incredible pleasure to see how the ideas and the structures that are in these new technologies can be explored in a completely different way by artists. This was obviously like the goal of our program, but also maybe part of the joy of that experience is seeing surprises and novel ideas emerge, novel ways of using the technology, and even, watching, I guess emergence is like the important word there, right? Like these things emerge out of these connections that are made inside the technology in the high dimensional space of neural nets, but also like in the relationships between people that use them and the relationships between architecture and people. So this idea that we're talking about of synesthetic architecture, to me is one of those emergent properties that's in the structure, right? Researchers made these structures to train. They found ones that work better for training AI, for training neural nets. And as they kind of converged on those structures start to show us properties of themselves, like the high dimensional nature of it starts to show us like that high dimensionality as a form for thinking or as a form for creativity has these kind of properties that belong to it. And so this synesthetic thing, the idea of architecture as something that could enfold multiple senses and be generative and really work in a hyperdimensional spatiality, not just 2D drawings and screen media or 3D buildings, but actually, or 4D time-based media, but actually all of those three-dimensional spaces, four-dimensional temporal media combining with the high-dimensional latent space of machine learning as a new way of thinking through traditional problems of architecture or opportunities of design and art and creativity. It's that structure manifests in the work that people like you make and shows us what these new emergent possibilities are. And that is entirely the point of the Artists and Machine Intelligence program, was to create that understanding so that the people that are doing research for other applications will be able to perceive in that way.
this point is really very, very inspiring, Kenric, because as you said, like hyperspace, or especially like when a machine learned, it doesn't require any 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional reality. I mean, for me in the residency, the very first weeks, I remember that we have been discussing when we talk about archive dreaming or X dreaming, X memories or X hallucinations, this idea of like a neuroscience, AI, and architecture could come together in a speculation context. But also, we were also witnessing something that when a machine defines a space mathematically or conceptually or whatever we call latent space, let's call it, right? The latent space for architecture is not existed. I mean, 4 years ago, I mean, there was no any discussions. There was no like plan for how to cut a plan or section of a machine's mind, like how we can visualize this invisible world for the architectural context, maybe mathematically and scientifically. Of course, the research was very, I mean, intensely going on, incredible. But from the architectural perspective, there was not too much things that we have been like speculating back in time. And I think when you mention hyperspace or this dimension, these n dimensions as a kind of a narrative for us as humans or speculation space for architecture, there was a whole massive like invisible beauty, like dangerously beautiful for some people because they think this will never be perceivable for humanity. But I think what we were doing with these projects, at least trying to understand, even putting a simple interface between a human and an archive, and whenever a human touches that XYZ coordinates, he or she can fly in the mind of a machine by simply touching and defining a super simple camera flying in TSNE algorithm inside 1.7 million documents, or in other projects, whatever archives existed. I think it was giving an audience to navigate in a space that doesn't need to be concrete, glass, or steel. A space in flux, a space is beyond our, I mean, Newtonian or Cartesian or physical biased world of imagination.
Yeah, I agree. I think that art is probably the best language that we have for trying to understand that dimensionality. I mean, you know, GPT-3 has come out. I've been doing some writing with it, and my experience with that is that it is also an interface, right? So the images that you create, the ways of representing this data are interfaces, and language is another interface. Sound is another interface, and that's been a critical piece of all the works that we're talking about that you've made. So when we start to put these together, like media, images, sounds that are generated, and language as a direct interface to our meaning-making capacity, when we put those together, we suddenly have a multimodal way of interacting with that latent space. And the experience of using those interfaces can be just incredible and beautiful and moving and interesting, but also I think there's a couple aspects to it. One is like, what is in there? What is being mapped and understood, right? Like how there's the interface, there's the way you interact with it, there's the actual content. And so, you know, trying to structure that content and build training sets, understand like what should we be focusing on? What does it mean to focus on architecture? What does it mean to focus on the landscape? What does it mean to understand these different aspects, like the way that you're doing with these projects? And then there's also the structure itself, what the structure itself has to teach us. And there's, you know, in my own experience with writing, for example, I've seen modes of meaning making and semiosis that seem to emerge from the interconnected structure itself, new modes of perception that you might have for like what a building is or what a landscape looks like through spending time in that interface. And when we start to fold into that, our perception, how we perceive starts to absorb that high dimensional structure. We feed that back in the process of creation. And so this conversation starts to happen. Well, you've talked about it in terms of memory too, which I think is really interesting and important, because when we're dealing with the systems we have now, they don't necessarily have memory from session to session unless you're constantly retraining them, right? So in that engagement between a creative human and a machine system, the human becomes a kind of memory or a kind of long-term memory, right? So like you might find, and I'd love to hear, you know, if your experience is like this, but you may find like when working with the system, for me with writing, I was finding certain concepts would be really generative and rich, or certain types of subjects that I could input would feed back really interesting things. So I started to focus on those and to process them in my own memory and in my own imagination. And then I became, in some sense, an extension of the system as much as it was an extension of my own input. And that process of accruing and condensing memory and meaning seems to be really an important role for an artist in this engagement.
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful point, because I think we witnessed this serendipity in almost pretty much every project we use GAN algorithms, from starting with archive dreaming. Back in time, it was DC GAN, 1.7 million documents, an archive creating almost realistic documents, but they're not real. But we were speculating what will happen in the near future. A machine can, get inspired by the past that inspires the future, or an archive in near future, a human witness and AI learning faster, deeper, and maybe better than a human. And just that moment of witness of a machine is learning. And then in Disney Hall Dreams project, I think what we were much more inspired is the idea of a building hosting this data, these memories of a cultural institution. Back in 100 years, like, you can pretty much access every single sound recording, every single video recording, every single photography ever taken in a building. And then you were able to look at, especially Parag Mittal's incredible support to the journey. We were able to create an AI model that listened to every single sound recording in a building ever recorded. And by clicking one button, you can fly in the latent space and hear every single Mahler, Beethoven, or Stravinsky. I mean, that powerful infinity, but also possibility at the same time, it's just truly machine intelligence and a machine creativity with the human creativity. I mean, that feeling is, I think, super fresh, but also I think has an infinite potential. And I think for me, the problem was how to access that experience without being in the virtual space. And I think architecture is truly an incredible canvas that takes this information, transforms it into a material by using light, which is democratically can go away if you don't like it. Not like, very strong physical materials that needs to be there. So it's in flux, it can grow, it can stay. So very similar feeling, when that dialogue between the architecture and human, but in between we have the machine that has a policy or has a narrative or has guiding these interconnected feelings. It's definitely a picture of architecture, or hopefully it's one of the way of seeing the picture of architecture.
Well, it's really interesting to think about the LA Phil project in that way, because you're also talking about the building itself as a container for an organization, and as a sort of single moment, a speculative project at an important historical moment for the Philharmonic. You can, we can imagine what would the repercussions of that be, but what would it mean also to fold that understanding into the process of being an organization? I think one of the things that these systems can show us, if we're open to it and if we build them with some consciousness of this phenomena, is that we are all kind of part of larger formations. We're part of interrelated structures. We're interdependent with each other. So when we think about what a system, what an ML system in a building could show us for an organization or for a group of people, there's many kind of cybernetic feedback loops going on, and the idea that an organization could start to have this awareness of its past, this understanding of its patterning. I mean, did you see anything in the process of doing that work that showed how that self-reflective aspect of the work could play out?
And I think I think this point that you mentioned, I remember we were discussing I think it was the day we were trying to feed every single photo of the building ever taken. I mean, we basically look at the Disney Hall text and find out how the building have been perceived from the humanities perspective, and take that collective memory and feed it into the neural net and let the building one day decide or ask the question, do I need to look like this? And that freedom of thinking of a machine embedded to the architecture, and then this first awareness comes and says, I mean, no offense to Frank Gehry, of course, but saying can I at least at night be different maybe? Can I have this opportunity to look like that? Can I be that? That kind of a conscious model of space was a speculation, which I think what was amazing that with our dialogue, I remember you were also mentioning that since it's light, right? Light will go away again. Like it's just a one-time, one speculation. It may be wrong, it may be good, it may be whatever. But at the end, the building have this new perspective that we, as humanity, I don't think architecture needs to focus on beyond function and structure. But for the first time, we have this cognitive capacity of something given to a built environment beyond just IoT thing. That was, I think, very fresh. We have been discussing, I'm pretty, yeah, aware of that.
Cognitive capacity is also like enfolded into the human organization that is inhabiting it. And that seems to be like a really interesting place, because right now we think of these systems as sort of like it's all in the cloud, or it's all one system, or it's like my device. But like, what does it mean for that embedded intelligence to be functioning for like different formations of people? It enables a certain type of thinking of like who we are and how we're organized that could break from the models that we have now, or could allow different forms of self-organization to emerge from the organization of people, machines, landscape. I mean, if you think about what it takes to train just to train a neural net, let alone do that in collaboration with a large organization, it's a certain kind of collaborative and open mindset that's required to be able to facilitate that many different people working together from that many different disciplines. And there has to be some kind of shared goal, versus sort of saying like, in this sort of more romantic notion of an artist of like, go to your ivory tower and be inspired and make something and then come back and give it to us. I mean, that's a perfectly valid model for its own reasons. But when we talk about engagements with infrastructure and with social organization that also have creativity and computer science research and architecture and things that many, many people have a shared stake in, there's suddenly like a different mode that's necessary. And it seems to me, I mean, the motivation for me in the program has always been to kind of keep that space open and allow emergence to happen within it versus kind of like dictating like what the point of it is, or, it's really more like, let's take all of this complexity and just like use the language of art, use the tradition of art and the training of art to hold the space open so that novelty can emerge and new perception can emerge. But it has to, in these cases, with these types of projects, in particular, there are certainly ML artists that are working on their own in highly idiosyncratic ways and solo ways that are very interesting as well. But with these types of large organizations and the intersections of different disciplines, there's a real need to be part of a larger formation and to, I mean, at least for me, to kind of let go of the idea that like my vision is the main vision. In fact, like what's most interesting is usually what nobody thought of that comes out of the process.
For example, I mean, of course, then these two projects also inspired other projects for us, right? Like Latent Being was in Berlin, visualizing the collective memories of Berlin, or in Mission Hallucination, collective memories of New York. So we took the same model of ideation actually, because this collaboration was so inspiring that we were trying to detach ego from data and trying to find that collective patterns of memories to let the machine inspire from that can create collective dreams or collective hallucinations. Then architecture becomes this interface for that. But we never like try to be struggled by the personal information. We never struggled with the privacy, like, because the idea was always looking for innovation and discovery. So it was never like tied into this 21st century problem. So I think it was another great feedback from yourself and the entire AMI collaboration that we never focus on personality. We always like try to find that common tone, common language. And I think AI can be that thing to let us find the language that we were maybe missing in the humanity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting problem for artists, I think, because there's so much training and conditioning around sort of like developing your own voice, which is really important. And in that process, sort of like keeping your secret techniques to yourself. And there's a risk that an artist will lose something of value in doing that. And so it's a really interesting place to see these things play out. I mean, I think that maybe more collective nature of, let's just call it millennial culture, might resonate better with this collaboration. But there's certainly within the industrial and commercial aspects of art, there's certainly a lot of competition, right? So it seems that there needs to be some other way of structuring the incentives to be involved that would allow for that collaboration to be a part of it.
So what maybe from artistic point of view, as a conclusion, what I found extremely grateful to this collaboration is we had like institution like LA Philharmonic, we have like AMI helping to facilitate all these like hard, challenging questions and technologies and many things. And as a studio, we are like somehow in this triangle. But what I was, or in Archive Dreaming, like SALT research, again, with similar model, we change the institution, but we find new ideas, new feelings. And we play with architecture of library, architecture of a cultural beacon, Frank Gehry's, beautiful piece. But what I always like found amazingly and deeply purposeful and impactful is the type of collaboration that is beyond the galleries and the museums and the traditional collaboration methods that we know and we have been seeing for many decades. So I'm really grateful for discovering new worlds together. So I don't know what else can be done what else we can say to people, but this model itself, I heavily advise for other people to explore.
Yeah, I think it's really important, especially in a time when institutions are maybe questioning the models that they had in the past, or technology companies are being questioned for the way that they engage with culture overall. And for artists that are looking for ways of addressing problems that they experience or expressing just what it feels like to live in the world right now, that we need more of this kind of openness between groups to be able to come together and envision the present and the past and the future in ways that each institution can't provide on their own. I really hope that this isn't just technology making a space for artists to be inside of tech companies, and I really hope that it's not traditional art institutions kind of grabbing onto whatever seems like the most trendy or relevant technology of the moment, but actually a deeper engagement that uses the best modes of analysis, investigation, and creativity that each organization can bring to the table. And finding some kind of consensus for doing that seems really to have to do with defining who the stakeholders are for these different institutions and for artists, studios, and for individual artists. Like who are we doing this for is the important question. And at a time when institutions are probably questioning a lot of what they're doing right now, and tech companies are questioning what they're doing right now, but we have to put on the table the question, like, who are we doing this for? And how might that shift our understanding of what it is that we're doing, or shift the timeline that we think about what we're doing?
Thank you very much for these insights. And honestly, I wish that these opportunities, these collaborations can be influential for the people who are looking for understanding the unknown of, as you said, not technology, but also like the audience in this case. Like, I mean, from my point of view, what we are doing as a studio should be for anyone, any age, and any background. Like, we are trying to try to disconnect from all the bias, like audience problems of the arts, I can say. And I think what we did together, at least all these projects that have reached this public space, the people that from any age, any background in LA Philharmonic's like audience, or like when Archive Dreaming, like researchers from all over Europe were like coming and touching this art piece. I mean, these kind of moments were so serendipity that sometimes we even like define the audience. Like sometimes even though we have like a prediction of like audience, but when the idea becomes accessible to the people that we don't even know, and that beautiful serendipitic communication between the N audience with the N dimensions of machine, I don't know, like these are like really the beauty of, I think, serendipity and the collaboration's depth and purpose. So anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Refik.
For this dialogue for Ars Electronica 2020 Kepler's Garden. So hope you enjoy this dialogue.